Keanu Reeves, yes, that Keanu Reeves, stepped into the most outrageous, jaw-dropping showdown of his life, and it wasn't on a movie set. Picture this, a dazzling art gala where the champagne flowed like rivers and egos clashed like titans, only to erupt into the greatest, most controversial spectacle the art world had ever witnessed. Something so wild, so hilariously twisted, happened that night. Something that turned snobbery into stunned silence and left everyone questioning everything they thought they knew. A snobby art critic, dripping with arrogance, dared to mock Keanu's painting in front of a glittering crowd, setting off a chain of events so astonishing, so mind-bending that it became the stuff of legend. What unfolded was beyond imagination, pure brilliance wrapped in mystery, and it all hinged on one man, Keanu Reeves. Buckle up, because this is the story of how one night of ridicule spiraled into an unforgettable reckoning, and trust me, you won't see the twist coming. The Metropolitan Museum of Art stood like a fortress of culture under the New York City skyline, its stone facade glowing faintly in the twilight. Inside, the grand atrium had been transformed into a dazzling playground for the elite. Golden light poured from massive chandeliers, their crystals casting prismatic flecks across the polished floors. Tables draped in silk groaned under the weight of caviar, truffles, and flutes of vintage champagne that cost more than most people's rent. The air buzzed with the murmur of voices, art collectors, gallery owners, and socialites swirling together in a dance of wealth and influence. Velvet ropes cordoned off the night's centerpiece, an exclusive exhibition of new works by unexpected artists, a bold move by the museum to shake up the stuffy art scene. At the heart of this opulent chaos stood Keanu Reeves. He wasn't hard to spot. Amid the sea of tailored tuxedos and glittering gowns, Keanu moved with a quiet, magnetic grace. His black suit was simple, almost too simple for a night like this, its clean lines hugging his frame without a hint of pretension. His hair, dark and slightly tousled, framed a face that carried the weight of years lived fully. A faint shadow of stubble, eyes deep with thought, and that signature half-smile that seemed to know more than it let on. This isn't just a story, it's a revelation. And if you want to see how far it goes, subscribe now before it disappears. Tonight, he wasn't the action star or the internet's favorite philosopher. He was an artist, unveiling a piece he'd poured himself into, a canvas titled Echoes of the Unseen. It hung on the northern wall, a commanding presence amid the exhibition's chaos. The painting itself was a paradox. At first glance, it was deceptively understated, sweeping strokes of midnight blue and charcoal gray clashing against jagged lines of crimson and gold. It felt raw, almost primal, yet there was a stillness to it, a pull that made you want to linger. The brushwork was deliberate, layered in a way that suggested chaos and control locked in a silent battle. Some guests paused before it, tilting their heads as if trying to unravel its meaning. Others breezed past, too caught up in their own chatter to notice. But one man noticed, and he wasn't impressed. Victor Langley prowled the edges of the room like a vulture circling carrion. Tall and wiry, with a mane of silver hair swept back from a high forehead, he cut an imposing figure. His bespoke suit, charcoal with a faint pinstripe, screamed old money, and his thin lips were perpetually twisted into a smirk of disdain. Langley was a titan in the art world, a critic whose reviews could make or break careers with a single venomous sentence. His column in Art Vanguard was gospel to the elite, his taste the benchmark by which all beauty was judged. And he reveled in it. To him, art wasn't just expression, it was a battlefield, and he was its undisputed general. Langley had been circling the exhibition all night, his sharp eyes dissecting each piece with surgical precision. When he reached Keanu's painting, he stopped dead. For a moment, he simply stared, his head cocked slightly, as if waiting for the canvas to justify its existence. Then his smirk widened into something cruel. He turned to the small cluster of admirers trailing him, wealthy patrons and junior critics desperate for his approval, and raised his voice just enough to draw attention. The critique began as a slow burn. Langley gestured toward Echoes of the Unseen with a lazy flick of his hand, his wine glass glinting in the chandelier light. His words sliced through the hum of the room, sharp and deliberate. He called it juvenile, a clumsy attempt at profundity by someone who clearly didn't belong in this world. The strokes, he sneered, were amateurish, random splatters masquerading as depth. The colors, garish, a cheap trick to mask a lack of skill. He questioned why such a piece had been allowed into the Met at all, his voice rising with theatrical indignation. The implication was clear. This wasn't art. This was a publicity stunt, a Hollywood vanity project riding on the coattails of Keanu Reeves' fame. The crowd shifted. Heads turned. A ripple of murmurs spread outward, some laced with agreement, others with unease. Langley's followers nodded eagerly, their loyalty unshaken. A few guests cast sympathetic glances toward Keanu, who stood near a marble pillar, a glass of water in hand, seemingly oblivious to the growing storm. But Langley wasn't done. He stepped closer to the painting, his voice booming now, drawing more eyes, more ears. He mocked the title Echoes of the Unseen, calling it pretentious nonsense, a hollow promise of meaning that the work couldn't deliver. He suggested, with a venomous chuckle, that Keanu should stick to dodging bullets on screen rather than dabbling in a craft he couldn't possibly understand. The room buzzed louder. A few gasps punctuated the air, shock at Langley's boldness, at the sheer audacity of tearing into Keanu Reeves, a man beloved by millions in such a public arena. The controversy was electric, splitting the crowd into factions. Some sided with Langley, their noses high, eager to align with his authority. Others bristled, offended on Keanu's behalf, whispering that the critic had gone too far. A woman in a shimmering emerald gown clutched her pearls, her eyes darting between Langley and Keanu, as if anticipating a brawl. A young artist near the bar shook his head, muttering under his breath about gatekeeping snobs. And Keanu, he stood there unmoving, his posture relaxed. The glass in his hand didn't tremble, his half-smile didn't falter. If Langley's words stung, he gave no sign of it. Instead, he turned slightly, his gaze drifting toward his painting as if checking on an old friend. The crowd watched, holding its collective breath, waiting for a reaction, a flare of anger, a sharp retort, anything to match the critic's venom. But Keanu offered nothing. He sipped his water, set the glass down on a passing waiter's tray, and began to walk slowly, deliberately, toward the center of the room. Langley's eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by someone he'd just eviscerated. His smirk twitched, irritation creeping into his features. He raised his voice again, calling out across the atrium, his tone laced with mockery. He demanded to know what Keanu thought he was doing, submitting such a travesty to a place as sacred as the Met. Didn't he realize, Langley pressed, that art required training, pedigree, a lifetime of dedication, not just a famous name and a paintbrush? The tension thickened. Guests edged closer, forming a loose circle around the two men, Langley bristling with righteous fury and Keanu a calm island in the storm. A third figure emerged from the crowd, Elena Voss, a renowned curator with a reputation for spotting genius where others saw chaos. Petite and sharp-eyed, her silver bob gleamed under the lights, and her presence carried weight. She'd been the one to approve Keanu's piece for the exhibition, a decision now under fire. She hovered near the sidelines, her expression unreadable, watching the scene unfold with the intensity of a chess master studying the board. Keanu stopped walking. He stood just a few feet from Langley now, his hands loose at his sides, his eyes locking onto the critic. The room seemed to shrink, the air heavy with anticipation. Langley straightened, puffing out his chest, ready to double down. But before he could launch his next barb, Keanu tilted his head ever so slightly, his gaze shifting back to the painting. A faint flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed his face. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. That look, that quiet confidence, was a challenge all its own. Langley's face flushed a deep crimson. The crowd leaned in, sensing blood in the water. Whatever came next, it was clear. This night was far from over. Keanu Reeves, the man who'd walked through fire on screen and in life, wasn't about to let some pompous critic have the last word. And deep within echoes of the unseen, something waited, something extraordinary, something that would turn this gala into a battlefield of revelation. The stage was set. The war of art had begun. The Metropolitan Museum's atrium pulsed with raw energy, its golden light dimming slightly as if the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. The crowd, once a swirling mass of glittering gowns and crisp tuxedos, had tightened into a hushed ring around two men, Keanu Reeves and Victor Langley. The air crackled with unspoken stakes, the marble floor beneath their feet a cold stage for a battle no one had anticipated. Keanu stood motionless, his black suit absorbing the light, his posture loose yet commanding, an unshakable pillar amid the storm. Across from him, Langley loomed, his silver hair glinting like a crown he'd awarded himself, his thin lips curling into a sneer that radiated contempt. Langley's words still echoed faintly through the room, his earlier tirade against echoes of the unseen lingering like a bitter aftertaste. He'd called it a sham, a hollow gesture from a celebrity slumming it in a world he didn't belong to. The painting hung on the wall behind them, its dark swirls and fiery streaks seeming to pulse under the scrutiny, as if it, too, were waiting for what came next. Langley's attack had been a public execution, a deliberate attempt to shred Keanu's credibility before the art world's elite. And yet, Keanu hadn't flinched. His eyes, deep and unreadable, met Langley, with a quiet intensity that unnerved the critic more than any shouted defense could have. Langley shifted his weight, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. He wasn't used to silence as a response, silence that felt like a weapon. His smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation that crept up his neck in a flush of red. He stepped forward, closing the gap between them, his voice rising again, sharp and cutting. He accused Keanu of arrogance, of thinking fame could buy him a place among true artists. The words were venomous, each syllable dripping with years of cultivated superiority. He gestured toward the painting with a dismissive wave, his long fingers slashing the air as if he could erase it from existence. The crowd murmured, their eyes darting between the two men, captivated by the critic's audacity and Keanu's stillness. But Keanu didn't react, not outwardly. His hands remained relaxed at his sides, his breathing steady, his half-smile intact. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a subtle curve that suggested he was holding something back, something vast, something Langley couldn't yet comprehend. He turned slightly, his gaze drifting to echoes of the unseen, and for a moment the room seemed to fade away. The painting drew him in, its chaotic beauty a mirror to the storm brewing within. He studied it as if seeing it for the first time, his head tilting just enough to catch the light, casting a shadow that stretched across the floor like a silent promise. Langley seized the moment, mistaking Keanu's pause for weakness. He strode toward the canvas, his movements theatrical, his voice booming with renewed vigor. He mocked the composition anew, pointing out flaws only he could see, uneven lines, a lack of cohesion, a childish reliance on bold colors. He spun back to face Keanu, his eyes gleaming with triumph, daring him to respond. The critic's confidence swelled, feeding off the tension, his belief unshaken that he held the power here. He was the gatekeeper, the arbiter of taste, and Keanu was just a pretender who'd wandered too far from his lane. The crowd leaned in, their anticipation a tangible weight pressing against the walls. A bead of sweat glistened on Langley's temple, betraying the effort he poured into his performance. He expected Keanu to crack, to lash out, to defend himself, to give him something to twist and tear apart. But Keanu didn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, he took a single step forward, closing the distance between them until they were mere feet apart. The movement was deliberate, unhurried, and it silenced Langley mid-sentence. The critic's mouth hung open for a fraction of a second, his words snuffed out by the sheer presence of the man before him. Keanu's eyes locked onto Langley, and something shifted in the air, an undercurrent of power that made the room feel smaller, tighter. He didn't raise his voice, didn't gesture wildly. He simply stood there, his gaze piercing through Langley's bravado like a blade through paper. The critic blinked, caught off guard, his smirk twitching as if unsure whether to stay or flee. Keanu's silence wasn't passive, It was a challenge, a mirror held up to Langley's bluster, reflecting every ounce of his insecurity back at him. The crowd felt it too, their murmurs fading into a strained hush, their eyes wide with the realization that this wasn't just a spat. This was a reckoning. Langley recovered quickly, his pride too entrenched to let him falter for long. He straightened, puffing out his chest, and launched into a fresh assault. He called Keanu a fraud, a dilettante playing dress-up in a world that demanded sacrifice he could fathom. His voice rose to a near shout, echoing off the high ceilings, each word a hammer strike meant to bury Keanu's reputation beneath the rubble of his disdain. He pointed at the painting again, his finger trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of his own conviction. He demanded to know what Keanu thought this piece could possibly mean, what depth he imagined it held beyond its flashy surface. And that's when Keanu moved. Not toward Langley, but toward the painting. He walked past the critic without a glance, his steps measured, his focus singular. The crowd parted instinctively, their bodies shifting to give him space, their breath held as he approached echoes of the unseen. He stopped just inches from the canvas, his shadow falling over it, merging with its dark expanse. For a long moment he simply stood there, his back to Langley, his hands rising slowly to hover near the frame. The room watched, transfixed, as if he were about to perform some arcane ritual. Even Langley paused, his tirade stalling, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Keanu's fingers brushed the edge of the canvas, not to adjust it but to trace its outline, a gesture so subtle it might have gone unnoticed. But it didn't. The crowd saw it, and so did Langley, who took a step forward, his brow furrowing. Keanu's head tilted again, his gaze locked on the painting, and for the first time that night his half-smile widened, just a fraction, just enough to hint at something extraordinary. He turned back to face the room, his eyes sweeping over the crowd before settling on Langley. The critic froze, caught in that stare, his confidence wavering under its weight. Then Keanu stepped aside, revealing the painting fully to the room once more. But something was different. The light in the atrium had shifted, perhaps a trick of the chandeliers, perhaps something more, and the canvas seemed to shimmer, its colors deepening, its lines sharpening. A gasp rippled through the crowd, faint but undeniable. Langley's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to the painting, searching for what had changed. He saw nothing obvious, no overt transformation, and yet the shift was there, intangible but real, a whisper of something greater lurking beneath the surface. Keanu didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His presence, his quiet defiance, spoke louder than Langley's bombast ever could. The critic's face darkened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. He'd thrown everything he had at Keanu, every insult, every shred of his authority, and still the man stood unbroken, unshaken, with a painting that refused to bow under his scorn. The room buzzed with a new energy now, the tide turning, the crowd's allegiance wavering. Langley felt it, and it fueled his rage. He took a step toward Keanu, his voice low and venomous now, stripped of its earlier theatricality. He hissed that this wasn't over, that he'd see Keanu's name dragged through the mud, his so-called art exposed as the sham it was. But Keanu didn't flinch. He met Langley's glare with that same steady gaze, his half-smile intact, his silence a wall the critic couldn't breach. The painting loomed behind him, its secrets still locked away, its power growing with every passing second. The night had taken a turn. Langley's attack had backfired, igniting something in Keanu, something vast, something unstoppable. The critic had wanted a fight, and he'd gotten one. But this was no ordinary clash. This was Keanu Reeves wielding art as a weapon, and he was just getting started. The crowd sensed it, Langley feared it, and the painting knew it. Whatever came next, one thing was certain. Victor Langley had underestimated his opponent, and that mistake was about to cost him everything. The Metropolitan Museum's atrium buzzed with a charged silence, the golden light casting long shadows across the marble floor. Keanu Reeves stood at the center, an island of calm amidst the storm of anticipation, his painting echoes of the unseen glowing faintly behind him. Across from him, Victor Langley's fury simmered, his sharp features twisted into a sneer that had faltered under Keanu's unyielding composure. The crowd, a sea of elegant figures, hovered on the edge of their seats, their eyes flickering between the two men and the canvas that had sparked this silent war. The air thrummed with expectation, every rustle of fabric and clink of glass amplifying the tension. Keanu moved first, with a gesture so subtle it might have been missed, a slight tilt of his head, a sweep of his hand. He beckoned the crowd to step to the side to view the painting from a fresh perspective. His motion was deliberate, almost meditative, as if he were unveiling a secret meant only for those willing to look deeper. The guests complied, their curiosity piqued, their shoes whispering against the polished floor as they shifted leftward. A low murmur rippled through the room, growing into a wave of intrigue as they settled into place. At first, echoes of the unseen remained as it had been, a chaotic swirl of midnight blues and charcoal grays, slashed with fiery streaks of crimson and gold. But then, as their vantage point changed, the impossible began to unfold. The abstract strokes started to align, weaving together like threads in a tapestry. From this new angle, the chaos resolved into the faint outline of a solitary figure standing tall against a wild, untamed backdrop. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, sharp and sudden, as they leaned closer, breaths held in awe. The figure sharpened into focus, a lone silhouette perched on a jagged cliff, gazing out at a sea that roared with relentless fury. Waves crashed against the rocks below, white foam exploding into the air, while above, storm clouds churned, dark and menacing, their edges flickering with the promise of lightning. Yet the figure stood firm, unshaken, their posture radiating a quiet strength that seemed to defy the tempest around them. The detail was breathtaking. The subtle curve of their shoulders, the resolute tilt of their unseen face, a testament to resilience etched in every line. Keanu's eyes gleamed with a quiet pride, though his expression remained serene. He didn't need words. The painting spoke for him, its voice growing louder with every stunned whisper from the crowd. With a gentle nod, he urged them to move further, and as they did, the scene transformed again. "You felt that, didn't you? That was no ordinary moment. If it hit you, hit like and let's keep going." The storm began to fade, the dark clouds parting like a theater curtain to reveal a sky ablaze with dawn. Pinks, oranges, and golds spilled across the canvas, bathing the figure in a warm, radiant light. The sea calmed, its waves softening to a gentle ripple, and a path emerged before the figure, clear, inviting, a promise of hope after struggle. It was a journey told through perspective alone, from turmoil to triumph, each shift revealing a new chapter in the story. The crowd was entranced, the air filled with the soft scent of oil paint and the faint tang of champagne, anchoring the surreal moment in the senses. Whispers of incredible and masterful wove through the room, a chorus of wonder that crescendoed with each new discovery. Some guests blinked back tears, moved by the raw emotion of the imagery. Others stood frozen, their earlier doubts swept away by the undeniable power before them. Echoes of the Unseen was more than a painting. It was a revelation, a mirror to the human spirit's capacity to endure and rise. Victor Langley, however, was a statue of disbelief. His face drained of color, turning a sickly gray as he stared at the canvas he'd so arrogantly dismissed. His wine glass trembled in his grip, the stem creaking under the pressure of his whitening knuckles. He had called this work amateurish, a fraud, and now it unfolded before him as a masterpiece beyond his comprehension. The crowd's gasps and murmurs stabbed at him, each sound a fresh wound to his pride. His chest heaved, his breath shallow, as the reality of his misjudgment sank in like a stone. Keanu turned to face him, his gaze steady and piercing, though his features remained soft, almost compassionate. There was no triumph in his stare, no petty victory, just a quiet acknowledgement of the truth laid bare. Langley's mouth worked soundlessly, opening and shutting as if grasping for a retort that wouldn't come. The crowd's adoration was a tidal wave, drowning his authority in its swell. He had crowned himself the king of taste, the ultimate judge of art's worth, and in one breathtaking moment, Keanu had stripped that crown away. As the guests continued to circle the painting, marveling at its shifting layers, Langley shrank back. His silver hair, once a mark of distinction, now seemed a faded relic as he retreated into the shadows. His shoulders slumped, his face a mask of rage and shame. He slipped through the throng, a deposed tyrant fleeing the scene of his defeat. Keanu had not just defended his art, he had turned it into a weapon, humbling the critic with the sheer force of its beauty. Keanu remained, surrounded by a growing knot of admirers, their voices buzzing with praise. He accepted their words with a humble nod, that familiar half-smile tugging at his lips. But his eyes lingered on the painting, tracing the lines he'd poured his soul into. In that moment, he knew he'd done more than win a battle. He'd shifted something fundamental, proving that art could transcend judgment, that its truth could silence even the loudest detractors. The night stretched on, alive with possibility, and though the story was far from over, one thing was clear. Echoes of the unseen had claimed its place as a masterpiece, and Victor Langley would never dare challenge Keanu Reeves again. The Metropolitan Museum's atrium pulsed with energy, the golden light now softened by the late hour, casting a warm halo around Keanu Reeves and his masterpiece, Echoes of the Unseen. The crowd had thickened, their elegant silhouettes clustering closer to the canvas as if drawn by an invisible tide. The air was alive with their voices, soft exclamations, fervent debates, and the occasional reverent hush, each sound weaving into a tapestry of admiration that filled the vast space. The painting stood as the night's undisputed star, its shifting layers still sparking gasps as guests circled it, discovering new nuances with every step. Keanu lingered near the edge of the throng, his presence understated yet magnetic. His dark jacket hung loosely over his frame, and his hands rested casually in his pockets, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of intensity as they traced the crowd's reactions. That half-smile, a signature of his quiet charm, played on his lips as admirers approached him one by one. A woman in a shimmering emerald gown clasped his hand, her voice trembling with emotion as she whispered, "It's like you painted my soul." An older man, his tie slightly askew, clapped Keanu on the shoulder and declared, "This changes everything, son." Keanu nodded to each, his responses brief but warm, letting their words wash over him like a gentle wave. Beyond the immediate circle, the impact of Echoes of the Unseen rippled outward. Curators hovered near the edges, their notebooks scribbled with frantic observations, already plotting how to secure this piece for their galleries. Art dealers murmured into their phones, their tones urgent as they relayed the night's revelation to wealthy clients across the globe. The painting's brilliance wasn't just a spectacle, it was a seismic shift, a challenge to the rigid hierarchies of the art world that Victor Langley had long upheld. Whispers of genius and revolutionary began to take root, each one a quiet rebellion against the critic's now crumbled reign. Meanwhile, Victor Langley's retreat had not gone unnoticed. As he slipped toward the atrium's grand staircase, a few heads turned, their gazes sharp with curiosity or pity. His once impeccable suit seemed to hang on him now, the fabric creased from the weight of his defeat. His silver hair caught the light briefly as he paused at the threshold, glancing back at the scene he dominated only hours before. The crowd's adoration for Keanu stung like salt in a wound, and for a moment his eyes locked on the painting, its vibrant hues a mocking testament to his failure. Then, with a sharp inhale, he turned and descended the stairs, his footsteps echoing faintly before fading into silence. The king had fallen and the court had already moved on. Back at the canvas, a young artist, a wiry figure with paint-stained fingers, pushed through the crowd, his eyes wide with awe. He stopped inches from Echoes of the Unseen, tilting his head as if deciphering a sacred text. "It's alive," he muttered almost to himself before turning to Keanu. "How did you do it? The perspective, it's like it breathes." Keanu stepped closer, his voice low and steady as he replied, "It's not just about what you see, it's about what you feel when you move with it." The artist nodded slowly, as if the words had unlocked a door in his mind, and the exchange rippled through the nearby listeners, sparking a fresh wave of murmurs. The night wore on, the champagne flutes emptying and the air growing thick with the scent of celebration. Yet beneath the revelry, a deeper current stirred. Echoes of the unseen had done more than dazzle. It had ignited something primal, a shared recognition of struggle and resilience that transcended the polished walls of the museum. Guests lingered longer than they'd intended, drawn back to the canvas again and again, as if reluctant to leave its orbit. Some sketched hasty impressions on napkins, others simply stood in silence, letting the painting's quiet power seep into them. Keanu, ever the observer, slipped away from the crowd for a moment, finding a shadowed corner near a towering marble column. He leaned against it, crossing his arms as he watched the scene unfold. The victory was undeniable, Langley's humiliation, the crowd's reverence, the painting's triumph, but his expression remained pensive. This wasn't just about proving a point. It was about sharing something raw, something he'd carried within him for years. Echoes of the unseen was his voice, laid bare on the canvas, and the world had finally heard it. As the clock neared midnight, a museum official approached Keanu, her clipboard clutched tightly. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her tone a mix of deference and excitement, "we'd like to discuss exhibiting this piece permanently. It's extraordinary, nothing less than a cultural milestone." Keanu tilted his head, considering her words, then glanced back at the painting. "Let's talk," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of a man who knew the journey was only beginning. The atrium glowed on, a beacon of light and sound, as the legacy of echoes of the unseen took root. Victor Langley's name would fade into a cautionary tale, a footnote to this night, while Keanu's star rose higher, carried by the undeniable truth of his art. The story wasn't over, far from it. But for now, the masterpiece reigned supreme, its echoes resonating far beyond the museum's walls. Keanu paused at the top of the grand staircase, his hand resting lightly on the polished banister. The museum's vast atrium stretched out below him, its golden light dimming as the staff began to lower the chandeliers, signaling the end of the evening. The air was still thick with the energy of the crowd's awe, though the voices had softened to a distant murmur. Echoes of the unseen stood alone now, its silhouette stark against the white wall, a quiet sentinel watching over the emptying room. Keanu's chest rose with a slow, steady breath, the weight of the night settling into something he could carry, something that felt like purpose. He began his descent, each step deliberate, the soft tap of his boots echoing in the cavernous space. The painting lingered in his mind, its creation a vivid memory that pulsed with every heartbeat. That cliffside night, the storm, the figure, it was all still alive within him, a chapter he'd poured onto the canvas and now shared with the world. But as he reached the midway landing, a faint sound broke his reverie, a voice, low and hesitant, calling his name. "Keanu." He turned, his brow furrowing slightly as he scanned the shadows. A figure emerged from the alcove near the staircase. A woman, her silver hair catching the light, her posture slightly stooped but her eyes sharp with recognition. She wore a simple black coat, unremarkable amidst the evening's finery, yet there was something familiar in the way she carried herself, a quiet intensity that tugged at the edges of his memory. "I didn't mean to startle you," she said, her voice soft but steady. I couldn't leave without saying something." Keanu tilted his head, his expression open but guarded. "Do I know you?" She smiled, a small, wistful curve of her lips, and took a step closer. "Not really, not anymore. My name, Elena. I taught at the Community Arts Center years ago. You were one of my students back when you were just starting out." The words hit him like a ripple across still water. He blinked, searching her face, and then it clicked. The dimly lit studio, the smell of linseed oil, the patient voice guiding his shaky hands through the basics of brushwork. Elena. She'd been one of his first teachers, a woman who'd seen potential in his clumsy strokes when he'd seen only failure. He hadn't thought of her in years, but now, standing here, the memory flooded back with startling clarity. "Elena," he repeated, his voice softening. "I remember. You told me to stop overthinking it, just let the paint lead." Her smile widened, tinged with pride. "And look at you now. I saw the painting tonight. Echoes of the unseen. It's extraordinary, more than I ever imagined you create. Keanu ducked his head slightly, a faint flush creeping up his neck. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. She waved a hand dismissively, but her eyes stayed fixed on him, bright with something unspoken. I recognized it, not just your style, but what it's saying. That figure on the cliff, it's you, isn't it? Not literally maybe, but it's you all the same. He froze for a moment, caught off guard by her insight. The painting had been personal, yes, but he hadn't expected anyone to see through it so clearly. Not even the critics, not even Langley with all his bluster. He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting back toward the canvas across the room. Yeah, I guess it is. Alina followed his line of sight, her expression softening. I lost someone too back then. I saw it in you, the way you'd sit there, quiet, working through something bigger than the canvas. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel it. And now, seeing this, she gestured toward the painting. It's like you found a way to let it breathe. Her words settled over him, heavy and warm, like a blanket he hadn't known he needed. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the lines etched into her face, years of her own struggles, her own resilience. I didn't realize anyone saw that, he admitted quietly. Back then, I was just trying to keep going. That's what art does, she said simply. It keeps us going, and then it reaches out, touches someone else, like tonight. They stood there for a moment, the silence between them comfortable, weighted with shared understanding. The museum staff moved quietly in the background, stacking chairs and dimming lights, but Keanu barely noticed. Alina's presence anchored him, a bridge between the man he'd been and the artist he'd become. I should let you go, she said at last, stepping back. It's late and you've had quite a night, but I'm proud of you, Keanu, truly. He smiled, a real smile this time, unguarded and warm. Thank you, Alina, for everything, back then and now. She nodded, her eyes glistening faintly, then turned and slipped back into the shadows of the alcove. Keanu watched her go, her figure disappearing around the corner, leaving him alone once more. He lingered on the landing, his hand tightening briefly on the banister, then resumed his descent. The staircase seemed shorter now, the distance between the past and present closing with every step. When he reached the bottom, he paused, glancing back at echoes of the unseen one last time. The painting glowed faintly under the last of the lights, its hidden figure standing resolute against the storm. Alina's words echoed in his mind. It's like you found a way to let it breathe, and he felt a quiet certainty settle into his bones. This wasn't the end of the journey, not for him or the painting. It was a beginning, a doorway to something new. With a final nod to the canvas, Keanu turned and stepped out into the cool night air, the museum doors closing softly behind him. The city hummed beyond, alive with possibility, and for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to meet it. The night air hit Keanu Reeves like a quiet slap, cool, crisp, and alive with the city's restless hum. He stepped out of the Metropolitan Museum's golden glow, the broad stone steps stretching beneath him, leading down to a world that felt both familiar and distant. New York's skyline loomed ahead, a jagged tapestry of steel and light, its glow pulsing against the dark. He paused, his breath clouding in the chill, and let the night seep into him. Behind him, the museum doors eased shut, muffling the crowd's lingering gasps, but the energy of echoes of the unseen, his painting, his soul laid bare, hummed in the air like a secret only he could hear. He descended the steps, hands in his pockets, boots tapping a steady beat. The street below buzzed, taxis slicing through the night, pedestrians blurring into shadows, a siren wailing somewhere far off. Yet inside, Keanu felt still. This wasn't just a win over Victor Langley's venom. It was a gift he'd given the world, and the world had taken it in. His painting had spoken, and they'd listened. Near the bottom of the steps, a small knot of admirers waited, their faces glowing with awe. They approached, tentative, clutching programs and phones. "Mr. Reeves, your painting, it's incredible," a young woman said, her voice trembling with emotion. "It felt like my story was up there." Keanu's half-smile flickered, warm and unguarded. "Thank you," he said softly. "I'm glad it reached you." He scribbled a few autographs, stood for a photo, then slipped away, melting into the city's flow. The streets gleamed wet from recent rain, fracturing neon and streetlight into jagged reflections. Keanu walked aimlessly, letting the rhythm of his steps lead. Alina's words echoed in his mind. "It's like you found a way to let it breathe." And they sank deeper now, true in a way he hadn't fully grasped before. Echoes of the unseen had been his storm, his release, and somehow it had become theirs too. The city thrummed around him, alive and chaotic, but he felt apart from it, a quiet observer. He passed a cafe, its windows steamed with warmth, then a street musician strumming a soulful tune. Keanu paused, tossed a few bills into the open case and moved on, drawn toward the river. The waterfront was empty, the dark water lapping at the piers. He leaned against the railing, the cold metal sharp against his hands, and stared out. The city's lights danced on the surface, a broken mirror of brilliance and shadow. A tugboat's horn moaned in the distance, low and haunting. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he was back on that cliff, the wind screaming, the waves thrashing, the storm clawing at him. But here now he stood in the aftermath, steady and whole. His phone buzzed, jolting him back. A text from the curator. "Echoes of the unseen has collectors lining up. We're talking permanent exhibit. This is just the start." Keanu's thumb lingered over the screen, but he pocketed it unanswered. Not yet. This moment was his to hold, to feel. He turned from the river, eyes tracing the skyline again. The city was alive, resilient, like the figure in his painting. Echoes of the unseen would find its home, here or elsewhere, but its real mark was already made in the hearts it stirred, the silences it broke. Heading back toward the museum, a figure stepped from the shadows near the steps. Victor Langley. His silver hair was a mess, his coat sagging, his eyes hollowed by defeat. They locked gazes, the air taut between them. "I underestimated you," Langley rasped, the words dragged out like they hurt. "I was wrong." Keanu stood still, his face a mask. He looked at the critic, really looked, and saw the fractures, the man beneath the malice. "It was never about me," he said, voice low. "It was about the art, always has been." Langley's jaw clenched, but he nodded, a faint, bitter concession. Then he turned and faded into the night, footsteps swallowed by the city. Keanu exhaled, a weight lifting. The fight was done, but the bigger war, for art's truth, its freedom, rolled on, fought by others in quiet corners everywhere. He'd done his part. Back inside the museum's atrium, he grabbed his coat. The painting loomed in the dim light, its depth still whispering. He touched the frame lightly. "You did good," he said, a quiet farewell. Then he walked out, the doors closing behind him. The city sprawled ahead, vast and vibrant. Keanu stepped into it, unburdened, his path open. The night's echoes would fade, but the next story, the next canvas, waited. And somewhere his masterpiece would keep speaking, timeless, fierce, and true. If you enjoyed this story, there's another video on screen right now. Go ahead and give it a look for an even more astonishing tale. And don't forget, we'll have many more uplifting and dramatic stories coming your way. So make sure you subscribe to our channel. That way you'll never miss our newest uploads.